But his greatest transformation may have been personal, not professional. The man who helped destroy a potential wrestlers' union in the 1980s by telling Vince McMahon about Jesse Ventura's plans became the man who stood up for his beliefs regardless of the consequences. The man who used racist language in private became the man who publicly sought forgiveness and tried to make amends.
Yeah, I was sad to see the news that Hulk Hogan passed away.
The entertainment icon who lived for adoration became the humbled believer who lived for something greater. His last major public appearance at the Republican National Convention showed both sides of Hogan. The showman who could still rip off his shirt and energize a crowd, and the private citizen Terry Bollea who felt compelled to speak his mind. As an entertainer, I try to stay out of politics, he told the crowd. But after everything that's happened to our country over the past 4 years, and everything that happened last weekend, I can no longer stay silent. Those words feel prophetic now. Hogan refused to stay silent, even when it would have been easier, safer, more comfortable to do so. He spoke about his faith when Hollywood mocked believers. He supported Trump when the entertainment industry leans heavily the other way. He admitted his failings when celebrity culture demands perfection. And he sought redemption when cancel culture offers none, in the days since his death. The tributes have poured in from across the wrestling world. Hulk Hogan was a true legend, wrote Kane. His contributions to our business are immeasurable, said The Undertaker. Even Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, who famously faced Hogan at WrestleMania X8 in what many consider one of the greatest matches of all time, shared emotional stories about Hogan's influence on his life. But what's missing from many of these tributes is acknowledgement of Hogan's final transformation, his spiritual rebirth. It's as if the industry that made him famous is uncomfortable with the man he became at the end.
Just learned that Hulk Hogan passed away. I mean, when you heard the news, what was your first thought?
Well, it was almost shock because he was one of those guys who was larger than life.
They celebrate Hulkamania, but they ignore Terry Bollea's testimony. They praise the character, but seem uncertain what to do with the real man's final message. Why is that? Is it because a genuine Christian testimony doesn't fit the narrative? Is it because a Trump supporter finding peace through faith challenges to many comfortable assumptions? Or is it because the redemption arc, from fame to scandal to genuine spiritual transformation, is too complex to nuance for our black and white culture? The pattern is becoming impossible to ignore. Celebrities who step outside accepted boundaries often find themselves marginalized. Those who speak unpopular truths find themselves silenced. And those who find faith after fame often find their testimonies downplayed or ignored. Hogan's final years followed this pattern perfectly. Despite being arguably the most important figure in wrestling history, his spiritual rebirth and political stance made him increasingly persona non grata in mainstream circles. The greatest moment ever in my life as far as my career, Hogan once said about body slamming Andre the Giant, but by the end of his life, his priorities had shifted dramatically. His greatest moment was no longer in the ring, it was in the baptismal waters. It was in surrender, not victory. It was in humility, not showmanship. And that transformation, from fame-seeking showman to humble believer, may be the most impressive feat he ever accomplished. Let me tell you something, brother. Hogan would famously begin his wrestling promos, but his final message wasn't about opponents or championship belts. It wasn't about vitamins or training. It was about finding peace through faith. It was about humbling himself before God. It was about recognizing that all the fame, fortune, and adulation in the world could...
And I remember he was immense. He was probably about 315 pounds, but very smart. And had his deep, calming voice. And he was willing to do anything that would make the show better.
Couldn't fill the void that only faith could. That's not a message that fits neatly into today's polarized culture. It's not a message that sells pay-per-views or merchandise. It's not a message that drives engagement on social media. But it might be the most important message Hogan ever delivered. And now, with his passing, we have to ask whether we were really listening. Some will dismiss Hogan's final transformation as a PR stunt, as damage control after his earlier scandals. But those closest to him describe a genuine change. They describe a man who had finally found peace. They describe someone who, after decades of playing a character, had finally embraced his authentic self. "I'm all in with God" wasn't a catchphrase. It was a confession. No worries, no hate, no judgment, only love. Those were among Hogan's final public words after his baptism. For a man who had seen it all, done it all, and been through hell and back in the public eye, those words carry weight. They speak of someone who had finally found what matters. And perhaps that's the real legacy Hulk Hogan leaves behind, not just as an entertainer who changed an industry, but as a flawed human being who found redemption. The questions remain. Was Hogan's transformation genuine? Did he truly find peace before his death? And why does our culture seem so uncomfortable with redemption narratives? Why do we prefer to remember celebrities for their scandals rather than their growth? These are questions that transcend wrestling. They speak to our collective soul as a society. As news of Hogan's death broke, his family released a statement asking for privacy and encouraging fans to take solace in the wonderful memories he left behind for the millions of fans worldwide, whose lives he touched for more than decades. But perhaps the most touching tribute came from his wife Sky, who wrote, "I wasn't ready for this. My heart is in pieces." He had been dealing with some health issues, but I truly believed we would overcome them. The tragedy isn't just that Hulk Hogan died. The tragedy is that he died just as Terry Bollea was finding his voice, just as he was stepping out from behind the character, just as he was embracing his faith and standing for his beliefs, regardless of the consequences, just as he was showing that redemption is possible, that growth is possible, that transformation is possible, even for those who have fallen furthest. In wrestling, they talk about kayfabe, the practice of portraying staged events as real. Hulkamania was the ultimate kayfabe, but Terry Bollea's final testimony was anything but staged. It was raw, it was real, it was a flawed man finding peace through faith. I was sick and tired of myself, he admitted. In a culture obsessed with self, with brand, with image, that admission is revolutionary. Now he's gone, the showman who could command 93,000 fans with a flex of his biceps. The entertainer who transcended wrestling to become a cultural icon, the fallen hero who found redemption through faith. All gone, but leaving behind a legacy that's far more complex, far more nuanced, far more human than most are willing to acknowledge. So what was Hulk Hogan's final message? It wasn't about politics, though he was politically active until the end. It wasn't about wrestling, though that made him famous. It was about finding peace through faith. It was about humbling yourself. It was about acknowledging your flaws and seeking redemption. It was about becoming real after a lifetime of playing a character. Total surrender and dedication to Jesus is the greatest day of my life. Those words, shared after his baptism, may be the most authentic thing Hulk Hogan ever said. And whether you share his faith or not, there's something powerful in a man who had it all by worldly standards admitting that none of it filled the void inside him. There's something compelling about a cultural icon humbling himself and seeking something greater. As we mourn Hulk Hogan, the wrestler, the entertainer, the cultural phenomenon, let's not forget Terry Bollea, the flawed human being who found redemption. Let's remember not just the catchphrases and the championship belts, but the journey of a man who admitted his failings and sought to be better. In a culture that offers no path to redemption, that holds past sins against people forever, Hogan's final transformation stands as a powerful counter-narrative. What will you do with Hogan's final message? Will you dismiss it as the desperate act of a fallen star trying to rehabilitate his image? Or will you see it as the authentic testimony of a man who had finally found what truly matters? The choice says more about us than it does about him. In the end, Hulk Hogan wasn't immortal. The 24-inch pythons couldn't fight off death. The vitamins and prayers couldn't prevent cardiac arrest. The millions of Hulkamaniacs couldn't save their hero. But perhaps Terry Bollea found something more valuable than immortality in his final years. Perhaps he found peace. Perhaps he found redemption. Perhaps he found himself after decades of playing a character. No worries, no hate, no judgment. Only love. Those words feel like an appropriate epitaph for a man who spent his career dividing audiences, who knew both adoration and hatred, who experienced both the heights of fame and the depths of scandal. In his final message, Hogan wasn't asking us to cheer for him one more time. He was sharing what he'd found after all the cheers had faded, and whether we listen or not is up to us. That's it for today. We've lost a legend, but perhaps we've gained a lesson about what really matters. About the emptiness of fame, about the possibility of redemption, about finding peace not through adoration but through surrender. Hulkamania may be gone forever, but Terry Bollea's final message lives on for those willing to hear it. Until next time, goodbye. Goodbye. No judgment, only love. But was anyone really listening? And why does it feel like every time someone finds peace, speaks truth, or tries to change their legacy, they end up silenced? The wrestling world is in shock. Terry Bollea, known worldwide as Hulk Hogan, is gone for decades. He was the Face of professional wrestling, a cultural icon who transcended the sport. His signature moves, his passionate promos, his vitamins and prayers, they made him immortal in the eyes of millions, but in his final years, Hogan was fighting different battles. Battles against his past, against his demons, against the system that once elevated him and then tried to erase him. And his final message wasn't delivered in the ring, it was delivered in a church. As water washed over him, symbolizing rebirth. "I'm all in with God," Hogan declared months before his death. This wasn't just another catchphrase. This was a man who had seen it all, done it all, and realized that none of it, not the fame, not the fortune, not the adoration of millions, could fill the void inside him. "Everything else is a distant second to what happens around me," he admitted in one of his final interviews. Was this just another act from a master performer? Or was this the real Terry Bollea finally emerging from behind the Hulk persona? Let's get into it. Hulk Hogan's sudden death has left fans in shock, and others asking questions. The 71-year-old icon, beloved for his role as wrestling's greatest showman, reportedly died from cardiac arrest at his home in Clearwater, Florida. Police responded to a 911 call at 9:51 a.m. And despite emergency efforts, Hogan was pronounced dead at Morton Plant Hospital. His wife Sky had recently insisted his heart was strong, but something doesn't add up. Just 7 months ago, Hogan stood tall at the Republican National Convention, ripping his shirt off in classic Hulkster fashion, energizing the crowd with his trademark intensity. "Donald Trump is a real American hero," he declared. His voice still powerful despite decades of wear and tear on his body. "What happened last week when they took a shot at my hero and they tried to kill the next president of the United States? Enough was enough," Hogan told the roaring crowd. Was this just politics, or was there something deeper happening? The timing feels eerie. Hogan had reinvented himself, not as a wrestler, not as an entertainer, but as a man of faith. In December 2023, alongside his wife Sky, Hogan was baptized at Indian Rocks Baptist Church in Largo, Florida. He called it the greatest day of my life. For a man who had lived so many extraordinary days, world championships, movie roles, television shows, to call his baptism the greatest, that was no small statement. That was a man who had found something real after decades of playing a character. And then there's the controversy. The same Hulk Hogan who once told kids to say your prayers and take your vitamins had faced a very public fall from grace years earlier when racist comments he'd made in private were leaked to the world. "I am a racist, to a point," he said. In the leaked recording, the WWE cut ties with their biggest star. He was erased from their website, removed from their Hall of Fame. The man who had built the company was suddenly persona non grata. But why bring this up now? Because what happened next reveals everything. In the face of global cancellation, most celebrities would have disappeared. They would have hidden from the spotlight. Not Hogan. He publicly apologized. He asked for forgiveness. He spoke about how he'd been raised in a different time, in a South Tampa environment where that language was unfortunately common. "I certainly am not a racist," he insisted in multiple interviews, but more importantly, he began a journey not just of image rehabilitation, but of genuine soul searching. "I accepted Christ as my savior at 14 years old, Hogan revealed in 2023, but the training, prayers, and vitamins kept me in the game. In other words, he'd always believed, but something had been missing. The trappings of fame had pulled him away from what mattered. Now that I am one with God, the main event theme of surrender, service, and love makes me the real main event that can slam any giant of any size. Through the power of my Lord," he wrote. This wasn't Hulkamania. This was something deeper. This was a man who had faced his demons and found redemption. But redemption stories don't sell as well as scandal. The media largely ignored Hogan's spiritual rebirth. They preferred to focus on his politics, his controversies, his mistakes. When he appeared at the Republican National Convention in 2024, the headlines weren't about a man who had found peace. They were about a controversial figure supporting a controversial candidate. But those who were paying attention saw something different. They saw a man who had nothing left to prove, nothing left to gain, standing up for what he believed in. Consequences be damned. "I was sick and tired of myself," Hogan admitted in one of his final interviews. For a man whose entire career was built around self-promotion, around being the biggest, the best, the most iconic, that admission cost something. It cost pride, it cost ego, it cost the very foundations of the character he'd built. And yet, there he was, humbling himself, not for show, not for a comeback, but because he'd finally found what mattered. And then, suddenly, he's gone. Just when it seemed like Hogan had finally found peace. Just when he had reconciled with his past and was building a new legacy. Just when he had stepped away from the Hulkamania character and embraced who he really was, the timing feels suspicious. Too many fans, not because there's evidence of foul play. Authorities have been clear that his death appears to be from natural causes, but because we've seen this pattern before with cultural icons who step outside expected boundaries. For generations, Terry Bollea was Hulk Hogan, the all-American hero who told kids to train, say their prayers, and eat their vitamins. His signature red and yellow gear, his handlebar mustache, his theatrical leg drop, they made him more than a wrestler. They made him a superhero. When he body-slammed the 520-pound Andre the Giant at WrestleMania 3, in front of 93,000 screaming fans, it wasn't just a wrestling move. It was a cultural moment that defined an era, but who was the real man behind the bandana? That's the question that haunted Hogan in his final years. When the Gawker sex tape scandal erupted in 2012, it wasn't just embarrassing, it was the beginning of the end of Hulkamania. The leaked footage showed Hogan in a compromising position. But worse, it eventually led to the release of private recordings where he used racist language. For a man whose character represented American values, it was devastating. The fall from grace was spectacular in public, yet in his final years, something changed. Hogan stopped drinking in 2022. He described himself as having been in crazy pain for years, dependent on prescription medications for over 25 surgeries. I've had 10 back surgeries, both knees and both hips replaced, shoulders, everything, he admitted. But as he stepped away from substances, something else happened. He reconnected with his faith. He found clarity. The same man who had been at the center of tabloid scandals was now speaking about Jesus Christ. As the years went by, I started seeing how things went, Hogan said after quoting John 3:16 and claiming Jesus as his Lord and Savior in an interview. It's got me to the point now where I'm locked back in. Everything else is a distant second to what happens around me. This wasn't a PR stunt. This wasn't damage control. This was a man who had reached the pinnacle of fame, wealth, and adoration, and found it empty. The question now haunting wrestling fans isn't just how Hulk Hogan died, it's whether we ever really understood who he was. The wrestling industry is built on illusion, on characters, on blurring the lines between reality and fiction. Terry Bollea played Hulk Hogan for so long that the two became inseparable in the public consciousness, but in his final years, he seemed desperate to show the world who he really was, flawed, seeking redemption, and finally finding peace. 805 having had such a long path and long journey. You have something like this that you've got to contend with, Hogan said about his controversies. He didn't run from them. He didn't hide. He acknowledged them, sought forgiveness, and tried to be better in a culture that increasingly demands perfection. That offers no path to redemption. Hogan's journey stands as a testament to the possibility of second chances. From his first major championship win in 1984 against the Iron Sheik, to his final appearance on WWE or AEW's Netflix debut in January 2025, Hogan's career spanned generations. He headlined 8 of the first 9 WrestleManias. He revolutionized the business. He transformed wrestling from a regional curiosity to a global entertainment phenomenon. Without Hulk Hogan, there would be no Rock, no John Cena, no modern WWE as we know it.